Hello to everyone out there. Welcome to you all. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy life to tune in to the beginning of our historical Farm Fest. I think there's a lot to look forward to. My name's Lucas Richert. I'm the George Erdung Chair in the History of Pharmacy here at UW-Madison. I'm also the Historical Director of the American Institute of the History of Pharmacy, and it's really my pleasure to host the opening session of our new Social History of Pharmacy and Pharmaceuticals conference, alongside some other excellent scholars who are joining me today. They are Professor Dr. Axel Helmstaedter, who's in Germany right now. There's Professor Erika Dyck, who's in Canada, and Professor Nancy Campbell here in the United States. I'm going to introduce them to you more in a few minutes. But first, I'd like to offer some background for everyone listening. This online conference began as something very different. It was originally intended to be a smallish in-person colloquium, and part of it was going to be held in the Wisconsin Historical Society. Part of it was going to be held at the Union Terrace overlooking the beautiful lake, and part of it was going to be held here in the School of Pharmacy where I am right now. From the very beginning, we had three academic journals involved: the Canadian Bulletin for Medical History, the Social History of Alcohol and Drugs, and Pharmacy and History. The intent was to be experimental, to develop special issues that spoke to each other. And so this conference is essentially an outgrowth of a collaborative spirit, a willingness to try something different, to try and build a big tent, actually, as Professor Elizabeth Siegel-Watkins argued in the most recent issue of Pharmacy and History. I suppose I had some personal goals from the very beginning, and these are directly related to my role as the Erdung Chair in the History of Pharmacy. I very much wanted to help generate a lively conversation around what the history of pharmacy and pharmaceuticals currently looks like and what it might look like in the future. I also wanted to showcase the work of early career and established scholars alike and from different parts of the world. COVID-19 changed everything, as we know. Wherever you are right now, I hope you're safe. I hope you're well. We've all struggled with the global pandemic. It's changed how we transact business, how we interact with each other, how we carry out our intellectual labor. And no surprise, it has changed the nature of conferences such as this one. So what was once a relatively small conference to be held in Madison has grown into something much grander in scale and in scope. Instead of an in-person colloquium, we now have over 45 different participants, 11 panels, 33 presentations. The total registration is over 375. And we have a lot on this call right now. Our event, I'm really happy to say, features an international stage with diverse voices and diverse content from such places as South Africa, China, Nigeria, Germany, France, Brazil, Mexico, and many more. Temporally and thematically, we have a broad mix of topics on offer, and I think we've captured some of the very best work being done in the field right now. And also, don't let me forget, we also have a virtual swag bag, which is not a name that I came up with, I assure you, but it will let you make discounted purchases on some great books in the history of pharmacy and pharmaceuticals. None of this would have been possible without the help of some extraordinary people. I often try to steal as much credit as humanly possible, but here at the School of Pharmacy and the AIHP, everyone know who's done the heavy lifting. So I suppose it's with a heavy heart that I have to share the credit and give tremendous thanks to first Kristen Husett and then Greg Bond. I also have to thank the graduate students in the Social Administrative Sciences Division, and to all of the presenters and to all of the chairs and the hosts. This is your event, really. I have to make a few more quick points and some announcements, and then I'm going to introduce our other speakers. The first point that I want to make is that this Farm Fest builds on a long legacy of excellence in the history of science, medicine, technology on the UW-Madison campus. So besides being based in the School of Pharmacy, I'm also affiliated with both the Department of History and the Department of Medical History and Bioethics. As in the past, Madison is really a splendid place to carry out research in the history of science, medicine, or technology. The second point I want to address is the American Institute of the History of Pharmacy. Maybe you don't recognize the name AIHP, which was established back in 1941. Let me just tell you a little bit about the Institute. It's based in the School of Pharmacy. It's a nonprofit and independent member-based historical operation. Its mission is advancing knowledge and understanding of the history of pharmacy and medicines. It's a member of the International Society for the History of Pharmacy, and it's a constituent member, one of the first, in fact, of the American Association of the History of Medicine. The Institute is dedicated to the collection and preservation of historical materials, including artifacts and images. The Institute also sponsors a wide range of awards for students and established researchers. These include annual prizes for scholarship in history, as well as visiting fellowships and financial awards for graduate students. So please explore the Institute website to learn more about the Kremers Award, the Sonnedecker Prize, PhD thesis support grants, and other awards. In years past, the AIHP has supported the work of some of the most important scholars in the history of pharmaceuticals and drugs. And I'm really proud to say that some of those people are involved in this conference. AHP is also dedicated to high quality publishing. Since 1959, the Institute has self-published a journal called Pharmacy and History, and it has done a good job with limited staff. However, there are going to be some changes in the future. It's wonderful to share that the journal just signed an agreement with the UW Press to publish with UW Press in the years ahead. This is a really important step for us. Another big change is the fact that the name itself is going to be modified. From January 2021, the journal will be called The History of Pharmacy and Pharmaceuticals, to better represent the actual breadth and scope of the journal. So please think about getting more involved as a member, as a writer, or as a researcher. You can learn more about the Institute at all of the usual places, such as aihp.org, at Twitter, and on Facebook. That's really it for my informational items. I think I'm getting close to turn it over to my fellow panelists. The idea behind inviting others to speak now is to broaden the conversation, to provide you with some different ideas, and obviously to do less work myself. Each of our panelists will take roughly 10 minutes to share some greetings, to share some thoughts, some questions, and then afterwards we'll have a more open chat. So let me introduce you to them in the order in which they'll speak. Professor Dr. Axel Helmstaedter is the current president of the International Society for the History of Pharmacy. He graduated as a pharmacist at Albert Ludwig University Freiburg and later received his PhD from the University of Heidelberg. His main expertise is the history of drugs, history of complementary and alternative medicine, history of hospital and clinical pharmacy, pharmaceutical care, and pharmaceutical technology. He's involved in teaching at the Frankfurt School of Pharmacy, but is employed at Avoxa, a pharmaceutical publishing company in Germany. Then we'll have Professor Dyck. Professor Dyck is a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in the History of Medicine and Social Justice at the University of Saskatchewan. She's the author or editor of over 8 books, including Psychedelic Psychiatry from Clinic to Campus and Psychedelic Prophets. She's the editor of 2 book series at present, both based at McGill Queen's University Press. And as if she wasn't busy enough, she is the co-editor-in-chief of the Canadian Bulletin of Medical History, based at the University of Toronto Press, and one of the major sponsors of this event. Finally, Professor Nancy Campbell is a historian of science, technology, and medicine who focuses on legal and illegal drugs. She focuses on drug science, harm reduction, and gender and addiction. She's the head of the Department of Science and Technology Studies at Rensselaer Polytechnic University. She's the author of 5 books, including The Narcotic Farm, The Rise and Fall of America's First Prison for Drug Addicts, as well as Using Women, Gender, Drug Policy, and Social Justice. Most recently, she's the author of OD, Naloxone and the Politics of Overdose. She's also the editor-in-chief of Social History of Alcohol and Drugs, based out of the University of Chicago, and another one of the major sponsors of this event. So those are our speakers. Thank you all for joining me this morning. I'll now turn it over to Axel, then Erika, and then Nancy. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. A warm welcome from my side as well. I'm really honored to have a small role in this virtual conference and would like to say a few words about my organization here. We are an umbrella organization of almost 13 national societies for the history of pharmacy all over the world. Overall, they are representing approximately 3,500 individuals. According to our statutes, the International Society for the History of Pharmacy, which was established in 1926, is devoted to promoting research and teaching the history of pharmacy worldwide, as well as disseminating knowledge and obtaining recognition for this discipline. We are organizing an international conference every second year, and in fact, the last one took place in Washington, D.C. almost exactly a year ago. Due to the corona crisis, the next international congress in Milan, Italy, scheduled for next year, has already been postponed to early September 2022. We are also offering a small research grant every second year and are publishing a journal called Pharmaceutical Historian in close cooperation with our colleagues from the United Kingdom. We are also publishing a newsletter every year summarizing the activities of the national organizations. Year by year, I'm really impressed about what is going on in the scene, as many national societies are highly active in organizing events, publishing their own journals, maintaining museums, etc. In Germany, for example, we used to have biannual conferences with about 150 participants, which is also the case in France, Poland, Italy, and other countries. Societies are usually successful where history of pharmacy is strongly represented in academia as part of the curriculum in the National Schools of Pharmacy. Most of our members are educated pharmacists interested and trained in history, and thus they may have a slightly different viewpoint than the audience of this conference here. I heavily advertised this virtual conference within our community in the past few weeks and hope that many people will find time to follow the presentations. People with pharmacy background and people with history background together should form an even greater audience, and I'm also convinced that both sides may benefit from each other's experiences. I'm really impressed about the program of this conference, which obviously has been compiled with tremendous efforts and great creativity. Thanks a lot to Lucas and his team for offering such a great program to all of us. As a representative of an international organization, I'm also really happy to see presenters from so many different nations, as health systems in different parts of the world developed independently and differently. We will have the chance to learn about drugs and history from a great variety of viewpoints. I'm really happy to do so and try to follow as many presentations as possible and as my professional occupations will allow. In this respect, I'm comparably lucky as many events are taking place in early evening in Germany, where I'm living. Again, I would like to thank the organizers and look forward to exciting days filled by thrilling studies from the history of pharmacy and pharmaceuticals. Thank you.
Everyone, this is Erika coming to you from Canada, from Saskatchewan. I want to echo Axel's thanks to the organizers and thanks to all of you participants. It's been really exciting going through the papers and looking through the abstracts. It's been really inspiring to see what is actually possible under these conditions that I think at first, as Luke perhaps mentioned, at first we were a little bit disappointed that we wouldn't be able to get together, but it has created new opportunities to move in this virtual space and to reach out to different audience members as well as participants. Albeit with some strange times for some of you. So thank you all. I wanted to use a few moments just to talk about what I think this inspiration has represented in this meeting, what I hope you'll all witness. These virtual meetings have allowed us to cross different boundaries and move across different spaces and invite new participants. And I'm really excited to see this as perhaps something that we might want to think about moving forward. From the outset, we had discussed wanting to reach out in a global sense, but we also wanted to be really open-minded about how we thought about intersections between pharmacy and history, medicine and history, and pharmaceuticals, as well as drugs and alcohol and psychoactive substances. So I think it's fitting that now we've actually been able to build a program that really demonstrates our ability to cross boundaries in these intellectual shifts. And I think that one of the things that has really struck me about this is some of the ways that boundaries and categories have been interrogated by our presenters, and some of the different ways that we're going to perhaps be made uncomfortable with some of the categories that have existed and how they've changed over time. And if I take a quick example from my own research, I think about the history of psychedelics that have moved from spaces where the knowledge about them was coveted in indigenous communities, among women's networks. They were used for different purposes. They moved through German-speaking, sometimes in Switzerland, labs. They moved through chemistry clinics or chemistry laboratories and into clinics. And we know the story with psychedelics is that they then moved onto the streets and have moved through a variety of different sort of regulatory regimes. And now, with the psychedelic renaissance afoot, and on the heels of cannabis decriminalization, at least in some parts of the world, we see a whole variety of new debates about how to operationalize a psychedelic renaissance, or how to commercialize mindfulness, and where pharmacy sits in there, and what role pharmacists have to play in participating in this new public debate about the role of psychedelics. And I see that happening in a variety of papers here, not looking at psychedelics, but looking at the ways in which categories of drugs and categories of psychoactivity have changed over time and in different places. And it often depends on who is using those substances, who is criminalized for them, or who benefits from the commercialization of them. This moves through empires as much as it moves through local contexts and local agricultural production even. I'm really excited to see the breadth of these questions on display in this meeting as we look through a whole variety of different ways that we've come to understand psychoactivity and how different substances have been understood according to who uses them and under what conditions. And so I think it's fitting that we bring this together in a virtual meeting, but also that we bring different journals together. And so then I'll take the last few moments to talk a little bit about the journals that are coming together: the Social History of Alcohol and Drugs, the History of Pharmacy, and the Canadian Bulletin for Medical History. We all represent slightly different constituencies, but I think it's really exciting and important that we start to put those conversations together. And initially we were nervous about how this might work, but the publishers have been quite open and receptive to the idea of creating shared content, and we will look forward to those conversations as we go forward about how we can maximize the cross-fertilization that we hope will occur at this conference. So thank you again to all of the organizers, and I really look forward to hearing all of your papers. Thanks.
Thanks for those remarks, Erika. I have also been thinking a lot about who uses and who benefits and who is harmed and under what conditions. And so, and I want to say that there are few objects or subjects of knowledge. For some reason, I cannot see myself. So I don't know whether I'm actually reaching you, but I think I am. So there are few objects or subjects of knowledge that pose the kinds of conceptual and political and really practical and analytic dilemmas in such as drugs, right? Especially when you consider their relationships with the practices of transnational colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. And so typically, of course, we think of these substances, psychoactive substances, as laboriously extracted from plant-based materials grown in the global South and East. They're typically refined, distributed, and consumed as legal regulated pharmaceutical products in the global North and West, and refined, distributed, and consumed illegally absolutely everywhere. And one of the wonderful things about this stellar crop of papers is that it really brings home the global distribution of drugs. So as a historian who's always followed drugs and their users, I think a lot about the questions of how could we tell our stories of drugs and the modern world differently? Do we need different stories? Now that we have new archives, is it possible to deconstruct the metropole-centric narratives that have founded the field of drug policy history. And that deconstruction, of course, has been underway since the 1980s. As these papers really show very well, that project, which I would call critical drug studies, now proceeds entirely in very capillary, truly capillary fashion. Often drawing, in my world, on what's called the chemical turn in science and technology studies, which reminds us how drugs have traveled that cycle from social construction to strongly situated in the socio-material worlds that produce, distribute, and lead to the consumption of drugs of all kinds. We have a field, right, which has been heavily narrativized. The governing mentalities of discourse on drugs, which I've been chasing really since the early 1990s, dominates us as historians and ethnographers to such an extent that the late 19th century, early 20th century hegemonic project of prohibition for some and consumption, regulated consumption for others, still exerts a stranglehold over global drug policy and its nationalist progeny. So over the next few days, our conversations with the authors of really this stunning array of papers help us to remember that drugs and drug policy have been essential to the making of the modern world, to statecraft, to the goal of gaining and maintaining hegemony over that question of who would produce, who would refine, who would distribute, who would consume, but above all, who would profit from the global drug trade, both the legal pharmaceutical trade and the illicit trade, and all of the roles such as pharmacists and sites such as pharmacies that are arrayed along that continuum. I mean, we are called really to consider what Foucault called capillary power and capillary knowledge. And so I want to just a brief biology lesson to let us think about what it is that we are doing together. Capillaries are exchange networks where what will be waste and what will be nutrient are sorted out and made corporeal. Capillaries oxygenate, that liveliness, that animation that Lucas was talking about in the very beginning. We have that within our field, and we always need to produce more of it. Capillaries also give off toxins. There will be moments of discomfort as we begin to realize the degree to which categories have imploded and collapsed somewhat in this field. Who's a legal dealer and who is an illegal dealer, right? All of those kinds of things, all of those kinds of questions will be before us. Capillaries also provide, however, the metaphoric basis for life itself. And so that is what we are doing. We are enlivening our intellectual lives. There are now, of course, multiple transnational social movements of drug users and unions, of harm reduction, of human rights. The user would seem to be a very interesting conceptual break for us to think about. I suppose in the pharmacy world, one thinks of them as customers or clients. However, these narratives, they lend to us the notion that we're dealing in a world of commodification. So in STS, we've tried to animate the users, activate the consumers and the users, and really to think about users as people who are participating in a broader kind of economy. These kinds of habits of mind, of how we think about what is a user, what is what is a consumer. These are very central within our field because we are constantly mapping the antinomy between legal medicines and illegal drugs. And that moral distinction that we all acknowledge and recognize is really written into policy practically between good drugs and bad drugs, good users, patients, and bad users, quote, addicts, persons with addiction. So these will have to be dispensed with if we are to remake our world and see drug users as actively exerting agency and care. So drugs continue to prove good to think with. They are material semiotic actors par excellence. That's Donna Haraway's term. My dissertation advisor. So I always feel slightly uncomfortable in audiences of historians because I always have that sort of science studies, STS kind of edge and the sort of feminist STS community in which there is a great deal of animacy right now, particularly around drugs. So we have to recognize this shaping power of these larger structures and the diplomatic agreements that hold in place. But we also have to recognize what holds our own conceptual categories in place. And these papers were wonderful in terms of shaking loose the hardening of the categories. There are new archives that are available, new interpretations issuing from scholars all over the world who are starting from often the global South, often from post-colonial contexts, or from the subjugated contexts of the global North, in which capillary exchange occurs in a most lively way. So drugs have always to do with both the political technologies of the body and the diplomatic and necropolitical technologies of state. So we must be in a field where such nimble scale jumping from the merely molecular to the transnational can be captured and analyzed, ruminated about, and really brought forward as so many of these papers do. Because that, after all, is what historians of drugs do. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts over the next few days.
Thank you kindly for that, Nancy. I'm feeling enlivened now after hearing all three of you speak. So I'd invite Axel, Erika, and Nancy to turn on their cameras, and hopefully it doesn't crash the whole system. And from there, we can have perhaps open up and have a little bit of a back and forth. As you get yourselves set up, I'll just say that, I've been in this gig now, in this Erdung Chair in the History of Pharmacy for almost 2 years, and I've seen it in a couple different ways. One way is to promote the history of pharmacy as a field of scholarship, but also sort of broaden the tent of the history of pharmacy and sort of start interacting with other fields, or subfields rather. But on the other hand, I think what is important for a person in my position is to ask sometimes uncomfortable questions about the nature of the scholarship itself, what has been written in the past, and what can be written in the future. So apart from the idea of interrogating certain substances and different drugs, what I'm hoping to do in subsequent years, in thinking about the twin fields of pharmacy and pharmaceuticals, is think about how ethnicity and race has been built into narratives with respect to pharmacy and pharmaceuticals, or hasn't been built in. And my sense is when we think about colonialism, we think about ethnicity and race, at this particular moment in time of all times, it's crucial that historians of pharmacy draw from other fields, whether or not it's the history of science, the history of medicine, to think about the stories of pharmacists of color, or women pharmacists for that matter. These are some of the big issues I've been grappling with. And I suppose what I wanted to put to you, Axel, Erika, and Nancy, is what are some of the other big questions that you're concerned with at the moment? What are you concerned with researching at the present? Or what should people in the audience be aware of? I'm not going to call on you. So if you have thoughts, please, by all means.
In fact, you asked me in advance to prepare some of these big questions, and there is one very big question, more for Europeans, I suggest. But anyway, it's a really big question. It has to do with the character of medicines and drugs as a special group of goods, not totally suitable for usual marketing mechanisms. I hope we agree in that. This has to do with their ambivalent character between benefit and harm, their obvious potential of being abused, and the fact that patients usually are not free in their decision to buy these goods or not, which is a prerequisite of free market. And most of the products need advice and consultation before being used. Costs are usually covered by health insurances and not the consumer. This is totally different to a usual business as well. And so fundamental market mechanisms fail. And the basic question for historians might be how far market regulations should go to provide a minimum of competition between key market players, but not to take an unnecessary risk for patients. This is what's being negotiated for decades in most of European health systems, and I suggest that historians might seriously contribute to the discussions. We have a very actual discussion about the fact that the largest European mail order pharmacy just recently bought a startup company specialized in medical video consultations. And since the 13th century in Europe, the professions of pharmacy and medicine are strictly separated, so that the physician must not earn money from selling medicines. So this is separated. And now these two parts are merging. And the question is this allowed? Should we allow this? What have been the reasons centuries ago? Are these reasons still valid? I think this is a big question. And it's actually newspapers in Germany are full about that. Yeah.
Well, I have to jump in because I am tremendously interested in that. My current research, I guess it would be the next chapter of the book that I unfortunately and regrettably published a week before the pandemic shutdown. I'm interested in nonprofit pharmaceutical companies. As you probably all know, I'm obsessed with naloxone, the narcotic antagonist that's been around since the early 1970s. And I'm interested right now in a group, a pharmaceutical kind of group that are trying to start harm reduction therapeutics because the FDA has given a signal that it would be interested in a proposal for over-the-counter naloxone. But it won't just approve over-the-counter naloxone. It's just kind of opened the door for pharmaceutical companies to come ahead and offer proposals. So I'm interested in these sort of changing market mechanisms and what that means, because I do think that these kinds of questions of who are the gatekeepers, I throw the regulatory folks in there as well. Who are the gatekeepers? Who gets to make these decisions? The really big question about what's happening to democracy in the United States, of course, is a really big question that I'm not going to introduce right now. But I do want to say that these questions that Axel has opened up, right? What is the nature of historical interpretation of these kind of market failures? What is the nature of historians' role in thinking about the present and the future, given the need to really think about markets? I think those are really big questions that we will be entertaining over the next few days. So I wanted to mention that just because it's something that I've come recently to really think about in terms of the drug that I'm following most closely right now.
In fact, I'm not sure if these problems can be solved in a few days. I think this will last a lot longer.
I might just add that I find it's hard not to think about vaccines at a time like this. And some of these questions really come to a point as we all are sort of invested in some conversation about the vaccines, but also as historians are repeatedly called upon to help provide a sense of calm or perspective. I'm not sure if we actually provide calm, but I hope that we provide perspective on not just getting the science right. We all recognize that it's not just about getting the science right, but it's getting the stories right, and it's getting the language right to help talk about risk and help talk about how we would actually entertain a public health strategy. And of course, that then moves through different health systems, and it moves through different communities who have different experiences with experimentation or with vaccine hesitancy. And so, although this is not an area that I do my own research on, I keep myself, historian pops up in a search bar, and I end up getting requests to comment on the future of vaccines as a historian. And I'm sure that many, many people here participating have had this kind of experience. So I think it's really timely that we are all witnessing a global effort to come up with a vaccine as we all sit here in our home offices participating in this virtual conference. And we should really be thinking about the role that historians play in providing some of that public discourse on risk and pharmaceutical products.
Maybe I'll add to that very quickly, Erika. I mean, one thing that has occurred to me recently is that the professional identity and professional authority of pharmacists has evolved over time. In the United States, there have been pushes going back to the 1960s and earlier in trying to sort out the pharmacist's role in the chain of healthcare. How did the pharmacist fit within a healthcare team alongside the physician and the patient and others? And so this chain in the medical marketplace has been contested over time. And what's curious about the United States and the development of vaccines now is how pharmacists are suggesting that they have a greater role to play in administering vaccines. And you've seen sometimes a strenuous pushback against this on the part of physicians. Physicians have said that's overreach. Certain physicians have said that this is the province of physicians, that pharmacists should stick to dispensing. So all I'm saying is that now we're having these sort of recurring debates about professional identity and the authority in the medical marketplace that goes back sometimes hundreds of years. And in Axel's case, he says to the 13th century, which is something I didn't realize. Let me ask you all then a different question. And I want to just say to the audience too, we have over 73 participants. If you have questions that you would like to ask, please, by all means, chat in the chat box, pop a question in there, and we'll go from there. And David Hertzberg, actually, just as I said that, puts in a question. He says, can we get more specific about what other historical construction makes drugs a distinctive category of human experiences, commercial goods, governmentality, and etc.? Is this a category we are given and thus make use of, or one that we want to push back against for any reason? So please, Nancy?
I just want to, because this is a very common kind of question about that arises in science and technology studies. And so I just want to remind everybody, people make drugs. In other words, people, various constituencies can make almost anything into a drug, as you probably know if you ever heard about the business about smoking banana peels or something along those lines. And of course, markets are also human made. And so I think that in thinking about drugs as a distinctive category of experience, I think we have to we are in interaction with people who are making drugs and who are making things into drugs, whether they are professionals, whether they are pharmaceutical manufacturers, or whether they are users who are making things into drugs that we didn't used to think about as drugs, the category switches that are occurring. So I think that I think we should always question self-evidence, always question categories. And so I think it's always important to multiply, proliferate, stretch, and also push back against those kinds of categories in our historical work. Thanks for the question, David.
Axel and Erika, did you have anything to add to that?
I could. Thank you, Nancy, and thanks to David. This is something that I find super fascinating. Just as I recall one of the first classes I taught to a group of psychiatrists, and I went in and I used the term drugs. And in my teaching evaluations, I was criticized for using the word drugs, and these psychiatrist residents were very clear with me that they don't deal with drugs, they deal with pharmaceuticals and with medicines. And it's always stuck with me as a way that we use language to signify different kinds of stories or different kinds of myths, I suppose, about these categories. But as I see in the chat, I've been working with the Chacruna Institute on plant medicines for the last few weeks, and there are lively debates about plants as medicines or as healers or as teachers. And this is another way of conceptualizing and telling stories about these. So yes, I think the language we use really matters, but it is, after all, language that people put on or categories that people put on these substances.
Just two small remarks from my side. I've always been unhappy with the term drug, as everybody immediately recognizes I'm not an English native speaker, so I'm unsure by that reason, but I would like to much more to talk about medicines or pharmaceuticals, because this sounds more being sounds like far away from this abuse topic. Yeah? And then are drugs existing by nature or are they made by somebody? And in the chat, I think there are remarks made by Paul Ranelli. He said plants make drugs, sea creatures make drugs. Of course, this is right, but it's only right if you know that this plant product is useful as a drug. Yeah? In the past, many people didn't know, and then they recognized and got the experience that plant derivatives can be developed to drugs and things like that. So I think it's both they are existing as such, but it needs a great deal of knowledge to make them useful for treating diseases and things like that. So I think both things are right to some extent.
Mm. Yeah, I tend to agree with Axel on this. And I wonder if we can maybe put Nancy, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just wanted to draw your attention to a recent book that's kind of a science and technology studies book, but it's about, it's Lara Foster's book called Reinventing Hoodia, which is about the South African plant and the legal regime. So I think we should maybe properly say regimes make drugs, regulatory regimes. However, I think there's been a lot of work on categorization. In fact, there's even a wonderful book by John Hartigan on race in plants, race in corn. I'm forgetting the title at the moment, but if you look up the STS scholar John Hartigan, you'll see. And it's these kinds of works have not been thought of as within the history of medicine, pharmacy, and science. They are very much, however, on point, right, with this kind of conversation, that there is an intense interaction between humans and non-humans, whether they are plants or animals, in terms of the long-running uses of these by humans. And so we have to think about our world as regulatory. Where? Sorry. Was someone else wanting to speak?
No, please continue, Nancy.
Oh, okay. All right. So just making the point that we use the term drugs absolutely as a non-specific signifier, but back to David Hertzberg's point, there is something special, right, that is always embedded in our use of the term. There is always a kind of intensely emotive character that is attributed to drugs when used in popular spaces and even in professional and regulatory spaces. And so we have to acknowledge that. I think that these are substances that, psychoactive substances in particular, we have made lives with, right? We are living with drugs. And we should not use the term, but we should also recognize that the term has multiple meanings in different domains.
Right. I 100% agree. And this is why I think that taking an internationalist approach to this conference was very important, to think about different meanings of drugs in Nigeria versus Brazil versus the United States. So this is sort of one of the underlying motives behind making sure that we have a really broad swath of cool papers on offer here. I wonder, considering if the audience has no other questions, if I just make a couple of quick remarks. In case you didn't know, we have someone who takes care of sound in the background. So if someone's mic goes hot, that the microphone is muted. I was just going to say simply that with the remaining time we have left, I just want to make a couple of small remarks, which is more along the lines of housekeeping than anything else. I want to make sure that everyone doesn't get online fatigue. So part of the reason in designing the schedule the way we designed it is to prevent people from getting burned out. We're all getting burned out, having to be in front of the screen too much. And so as you can see, whether or not in the invited presentations or in the panels, we have condensed the time frame a little bit. So the time frame means that speakers have to get to the point, which is something I often have a problem with. And then there's going to be a limited amount of time for questions. So that's one issue to flag up, is just be aware as a participant and as a host that we want to make sure that we're quick in getting to the point. Another thing that I wanted to flag up is that with an online meeting, yes, we have tons of benefits because we get to connect with each other from all around the world. But one of the downsides is that there isn't a lobby. There isn't that sort of serendipitous meeting after the fact. We can't just sort of run into each other in the hallways. And so bearing this in mind, I think it's important that you be active as a participant and as a speaker or whatever. I think it's important that, you know, you reach out if you want to reach out, get in touch with a speaker after the session, ask questions during the session, and try and build relationships. Even though this is sometimes dehumanizing as a platform to be in front of a computer, I still think that we can do this and build relationships. And so I encourage you to make connections and have a conversation after the fact. And then other tiny, smaller technical details. With each of the sessions, we want to make sure that we want to save bandwidth if possible. And that's fairly straightforward stuff. All you have to do there is make sure that your video camera is off, make sure that your microphone is off, and at all times, feel free to ask a question in the chat box because people are going to be ready for it. That's it for me. I guess the only thing that I can say is welcome once again to our Farm Fest. We've been putting this together for a while now, and it's absolutely brilliant to have you all here. Can I ask you to turn on your cameras and just give a wave to all of us? I think it's pretty cool to actually see everyone out there. This might crash the system. It probably will crash the system, but I still think it's fine to give a wave and say hello to everyone out there. There's 77 people here, and there are over 450 people who are registered. And thanks for taking part, really. It's kind of cool. Okay, guys, see you later. I see someone in Germany. I see someone in Great Britain.
You should take a screenshot. Someone should take a screenshot while everybody's on.
Okay, well, I don't know how to do that because I just don't. So maybe someone else will do that and send it to me.
I took a couple screenshots, so hopefully we're covered.
That's okay. Great, Bond. Yeah, cool. I see someone in Africa. I see someone just down the block. I see someone, there's Mazzy. Oh, yeah, okay. Eva in Glasgow. Hertzberg, I see you in New York. Paul, Pedro, cool. All right, guys. Well, I hope you are having a good rest of the day, and I'll see you in the sessions. Take care.